Back for another episode of The Martial View then today, guys. And we're with Tristan today, and we are discussing Aikido, and we're going to be defending it a little bit. Maybe. I'm not sure how this conversation is going to go. It could go one of two ways. We're both Aikidoka or ex-Aikidoka in my case, and Tristan's got a great background in Aikido and also making it apply. So putting some application to it and making it maybe a little bit more relevant than it is, or it should be in today's society. So I'm sure it's going to be an interesting chat as we've both got views on this, should we say. So Tristan, thank you for coming on, buddy. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this chat. And yeah, just introduce yourself to people before we get into it, I suppose.
Thank you, Dan. It's great to be here. And I appreciate you having me on your show. And this is a great topic. A little bit of my background. I started training in Aikido in 2004. Up to that point, I had almost 3 decades of experience in full contact sport competition art. So yeah. I came at it from a very practical background.
Yeah.
I'd done martial arts all my life. I think I started when I was 12 or 13 years old.
Cool.
I've done a number of different arts. Loved all of them. I mean, if I had every hour in the day devoted to martial arts, I'd probably have trained just about everything.
Living the dream, yeah.
Yeah, everything has got every art has got some great things to offer.
Yes.
But I was drawn to Aikido for a number of reasons. Primarily, the strategy of it to me felt very sound, and I really liked that. It was hard to find. I also viewed it as an elegant art. The use of efficiency, which the more I studied different arts, the more I found that efficiency was part of all of them.
Yeah.
There aren't really any arts that say, take that efficiency thing and just throw it out the window. We're going to use the maximum amount of effort.
As inefficient as we can be.
Yeah, exactly. We'll be as inefficient as possible. With the exception of
maximum effort for minimum results. That sounds good.
Yeah. If you want to build muscle, then you want to be inefficient. You want to try to use as much muscle to lift your weight. But so that's kind of my background. And, I came into Aikido and I learned a lot about the Aikido community and the Aikido world from the outside. And this is going to be very relevant to our discussion today. From the outside, it looks like it is unified. Like there is one Aikido that everybody's kind of going the same direction. They all view it as pretty much the same thing. And they're in alignment. They're not.
No.
Not at all.
No.
And so I think, with any discussion about any topic, the first thing to do is define your terms. And there is great consternation among Aikido practitioners about what Aikido even means.
Sure.
And this makes it difficult when you say, is Aikido a valid art, or is Aikido relevant, or is Aikido effective? Well, you can certainly point fingers at some Aikido practitioners and go, yeah, that it's ineffective, it's useless, it's pointless, they're completely incapable. So some of the criticisms of Aikido, in my opinion, are very well founded.
For sure.
However, there are Aikido practitioners, and I will say that in my travels and experience, there are not many of them. They're in the extreme minority, but they are the real deal.
Yeah.
And they can deftly handle physical violence and make it look effortless.
Yeah.
And put an end to it. And that I guess is the real crux of it. If you say, is Aikido being both of those realms, and there's even a third realm in there of Aikido practitioners, which are kind of the spiritualists. They are there for pursuing some kind of a philosophical or spiritual enlightenment.
For sure.
And they really don't have much interest in the physical side of Aikido. Yeah. They just don't. They like to dress up in the outfits, and they like to talk philosophy a lot. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things.
Yeah.
But they will not replace or be able to train you to deal with somebody taking a punch at your head. They just won't.
This is part of the thing, though. When you're talking about the efficacy and the effectiveness of Aikido, you need to first define what you see as effective, because what's effective for one person is completely different to another. What do you want from the art? Do you want a martial art? Do you want something that's going to work in a street fight where you have to defend yourself at the bar or outside the kebab shop or outside the takeaway at 5 o'clock in the morning or whatever? If that's what you want, Aikido is, okay, one thing. Do you want a way to keep fit, healthy, meet people, build part of a community? That's a completely separate thing. And this is where you need to define, or people need to define, what they want from Aikido. for me personally, if someone came to me and said, I want to learn a martial art that's great for street, my first thought wouldn't be Aikido.
Mm-hmm.
If someone came to me and said, I want a martial art that's quite well-rounded, it's traditional, I want a lot of cultural aspects, I want something that's good for your physical being, maybe your mental health, I want something that's part of a big community, I'd go, yeah, cool, go and check out Aikido. So in terms of the efficacy, even that what is effective is subject to debate in itself.
Right. And it even comes down to instructor to instructor and practitioner to practitioner. You can, and I've run across this in, let me think, every single martial art I've ever run across, with the exception of maybe one. And I'll mention that one in a second here, but you can go to the practitioner of one art and what he shows will be pretty useless in terms of a self-defense or actual real life type of a situation. And that covers a wide spectrum, mind you. Whether it's gangs or you're in a college, like a fraternity party and you get into a scuffle with drunk young men, you know, you're on a date and you get somebody pawing all over you. Usually women wind up getting that kind of a situation, or you get ambushed in a parking lot by a mugger. I mean, there runs to be all kinds of different real world scenarios where physical violence might prevail. But every single martial art, whether it's karate, you know, pick one, pick any of them. You know, Taekwondo, you can go and spend hours upon hours upon hours training, and they will do nothing for you to prepare you for a real life violent type situation.
Yeah.
But those same arts can have instructors and practitioners in them that will train you, and they will provide a good baseline for you to be physically competent in handling somebody who is trying to dominate you, or trying to either use intimidation or physical force to bend you to their will.
Yeah.
Actually, there's two arts that I think that are exceptions to that. One is wrestling.
Okay.
If you have a base in wrestling, that's a pretty legit. There's really no cream puff wrestlers out there.
No, that's true. Yeah.
There just aren't. And I'd say the same thing as Sambo.
Yeah.
And I would also say Judo is pretty solid. Those three are, I haven't run across many phony or fake Judo practitioners. If you're doing Judo, and I'd group those into the severe physical realm, you know, Sambo and wrestling. But you know, you can, and I'd like to say that about boxing. And if you go to
I'd have a striking
boxing gym, that's one thing. But
Muay Thai,
I hunted around for legit boxing gyms in my area, and they all do boxing fitness programs. They're basically like the boxing version of Taibo or Zumba, something like that. So you go do that, you dance around, you know, to music, to loud music, and have a great time working out. Doesn't mean you're going to know anything about dealing with an opponent.
For sure. Yeah.
You know, so that's kind of what I want to have have people, listeners, understand that Aikido is not unified. It is, it's fractured. In fact, I'd say in some ways it's in a period of crisis, because these people that take on training their Aikido in these different ways tend to spend more time kind of slinging rocks at each other than trying to get at least an understanding where they know the other groups, what they're into, and can kind of accept it. And you know, I will say a lot of I've gotten a few people criticizing me for being a little too much like Aikido should be a martial art. It was a martial art. It was designed from a physical conflict background. It should be able to do that. And the view is that I kind of sling rocks at the spiritual type people, and the folks that kind of want to do the choreographed dance part. Like, they are very into the physical, but it's not really designed for dealing with a free form opponent. Your opponent is always very choreographed. They telegraph what they're about to do, and you can make a beautiful dance from these motions.
And this is probably one of the biggest criticisms of Aikido, where there is no testing of every martial art that you just mentioned: Judo, Sambo, boxing, if you're not doing boxercise, for example, like a proper boxing gym, and wrestling. Everything there is tested against an opponent that is distant.
Even if you remove the competitive sport aspect, where you have an event where you're going to compete for points and you have a tournament winner, if you take that out even
just
at a wrestling practice, you have that live randori part where you have an active opponent. Exactly. And this is where I think, you know, within the Aikido community, you have a number of them, and I'd say a vast majority of Aikido practitioners have latched on to O-sensei's quote about his disapproval of competition. Mm-hmm. And many speculate that they understand what he meant, but I don't know how anybody could have a valid claim on understanding what exactly he meant. And, you know, on one hand, you could say, well, did he not want Aikido to become a sport like judo became a sport? Mm-hmm. Or did he want to remove the competitive, you know, one person trying to dominate a student and the student being able to learn how to deal with that in a training environment?
Yeah.
And I think that the argument could be made to support that view versus the let's not turn Aikido into an Olympic sport, for example, would be to say that O-sensei entertained challenges many, many times. Yeah. In fact, he rarely turned them down.
Yeah. And it's important to look at the historical context of what O-sensei did before, and especially kind of pre-Second World War and post-Second World War. I think that's an important and also important distinguish to make. When Aikido first came about, it obviously came from Aikido Jiu-Jitsu and then evolved into, you know, the Dai-Taru and things like that. And O-sensei, like, Aikido was a badass martial art at that point. You know, you used to have two referrals to even enter the Hombu dojo where he was teaching. So, and people from different martial arts, like judo, like all sorts of different martial arts, would go to see O-sensei and learn Aikido because he was a well-respected martial artist. And they go there, and then, you know, there's various stories of people going, oh, you know, I had a 3rd-degree black belt in judo. I had this. I went there and was just tossed around like a ragdoll.
Yep. And within those accounts, I mean, to put perspective on it, because we're so far away from it. That happened, 80 to 100 years ago almost. Yeah. And the fact that the people that wrote about it and spoke about it at the time reflected that there was an amazing amount of arrogance and ego with those people. Yeah. And now you take somebody with, say, a 4th or 5th dan in judo who, you know, is a legit badass. I mean, they didn't have strip mall judo places at that time. If you were a judo practitioner, you were doing the real deal. Yeah. Same way with sumo. And then you challenge somebody from another art, a master, right? I'll just use the term master. I don't know if they did at the time, but somebody who's at the top of his game. Let's just say that, because that's what Morihei was. He was at the top of his game. Yeah. He said, all right, Mr. Big Shot, I want to see your art. When you take on a challenge with that sort of mentality, as opposed to this would be kind of just a friendly little sparring. Let's kind of play around and see what we can do. If it's I'm going to prove that you're, you know, that my art's better than yours. This was very much the tone of the time. And they came away going, I don't even know what just happened to me. And by the way, I want to become your student. I'm ready to give up my art and study under you. Yeah. This did not happen once or twice. This happened repeatedly. Yeah. So, you know, now the big separation here is separating the art from the practitioner, in this case, the founder. Yeah. I would say, and I think that this is a pretty solid statement that is backed up by history, that Morihei Uesha was probably with the Bruce Lee of his time. He was more than likely one of the most talented martial artists in history. And where you got that kind of talent, and he was a physical phenom on top of it, which Bruce Lee was too. Yeah. You add those tools together, you really don't need a tremendous art in order to dominate when you have the talent and the athleticism together. But he also had the martial background on top of it. But and here's the point I was getting to, is that you can take somebody, and I'll list 2 other greats, Bruce Lee and Benny the Jet Urquidez. Mm-hmm. It was probably one of the best natural fighters. And Benny the Jet, he proved it. He was 67-0 in competition. I mean, nobody beat him, and he was fighting world champions consistently. So unlike Bruce Lee, who never proved it in a sport aspect, Benny did. And but is it the art or is it the practitioner? Were they able to create a stable of world champions? Yes. That's the question. Is it transferable? Because when we look at an art, we want to say, I want this champion to transfer their abilities onto me. What if I'm not a physical phenom? What if I'm not a supremely talented competitor or a talented martial artist? Because people have their upward limit of their potential. For sure. You know? And somebody, you know, I think Benny started when he was 8 years old in karate, or something like that. He was just a little child.
Yeah.
Now, what happens? A guy comes in at 38 years old and wants to start learning karate, and that's what Benny Urquidez started in, was karate. Are you ever going to be a Benny Urquidez? Probably not. But is that, if you can't, then is there any use of training it? In my opinion, it is. But that's for everybody to decide.
You can still reach a good level without being a world champion.
Absolutely. So as people pick through the art, and I think that this is something as lay people kind of go around and kick the tires, so to speak, when they what about this art, or what about that art? And they get into, well, this set of techniques is better than that set of techniques. I'll tell you, every art is potent. I should say virtually every art. There are some contrived ones out there that are utter BS, but for the most part, any art that's got a lineage to it has got potency within its heritage and within its history. Now, some arts have drifted a long way away from that history.
This is the next argument, isn't it? You know,
yes.
What is the Aikido now? The Aikido
exactly
that Morihei Ueshiba would have wanted. If he was alive now, would he be going,
right? Exactly. And I believe he would. I believe he would be very upset with how far Aikido has generally
drifted off the martial path.
Has drifted. Yeah, exactly. And there are absolute valid reasons for it drifting. One of the stories that I had heard fairly recently, and granted, I come from my Aikido comes from a lineage through Koichi Tohei.
Yeah.
And that
which is a very spiritual lineage.
It depends on when during Tohei's advancement, the branching happened. In my case, it was very early. This was, you know, I was learning from instructors that learned before he drifted way into the Ki Society thing.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But the story that I got was that I guess this was in the late 60s, and he was traveling the United States and giving like seminars and demonstrations to people. And he somehow found this crowd of people at one of these presentations that was fascinated with his descriptions of ki and developing that internal side of movement. And that was Koichi Tohei all day long. Like, he's like, you got to know how to move internally and things like that. Even though he was ridiculously strong, he was an athlete. He was a heavy duty athlete, but when it came to teach, he wanted to teach people how to use that internal side of their power. And this is very common with many different martial arts. Chinese martial arts, a lot of them deal with how do you get the most use out of your body.
Bang for your buck, isn't it? Right.
And this crowd was so fascinated that I guess they pretty much came across with the message of, well, teach us this key stuff, but we really don't care much about the martial art aspect. Well, as you got a crowd waving money at you, it's very easy to think, well, I'm gonna go serve these people, these customers that want to pay me to learn this, especially if that was his interest. And I think that was his branch that led him down a path where and that's another thing that happens with martial artists. You get to a point where you've done most everything that needs to be done, and you're looking for the next thing to do. And you could call it burnout, or you could just call it their interest grows and evolves and it takes them down a slightly different path. And for those people that trained under Tohei while he was strongly in the physical realm, they got a whole different Tohei than the Tohei of the 70s or, into the 80s, where he really didn't do, so far as I understand it, he drifted completely out of martial arts training.
Yeah.
And the Shihan that my lineage goes through was Bill Sosa. He was down in Texas, and Sosa parted ways with Tohei because Sosa was a former boxer and he wanted his Aikido to remain in the physical realm. Yeah. He certainly appreciated the spiritual side and the strategic side and those aspects, but he wanted to stay there as a martial art. And so that's kind of where my lineage comes from. And I feel very much the same way. And I've met other practitioners that definitely agree with, love Aikido, the spirituality side, the don't cause excessive harm,
Yeah.
The, good use of strategy, the efficiency, all that stuff is fantastic. I love it. But the anchor, the foundation has got to be the physical, because without that, then you're just now being a monk, or you're
and I think this is where the point that it's gotten to now. It's become more of a spiritual practice rather than a martial art,
almost exclusively to some people.
The hard training for some is gone. And again, this is slightly generalizing, but the hard training, like they used to train hard, man, and they used to batter their bodies and really go for it and train hard, throw hard, do stuff outside of the dojo as well. Like, all the strength and conditioning things that you would think of for a modern athlete, they did as well. But in obviously, whenever it was 80, 70, 60 years ago, that equivalent,
Right.
And they train hard, but it's gone away from that now to this martial art that is ridiculed across the board by many, many martial artists. And obviously the prevalence of YouTube and videos and things like that hasn't helped. But it has helped in a way.
Critics have a great case. I hate to say it, but they do.
It's helped in a way as well, because it calls bullshit. And it's just there. And an argument is that let's take the Gracies. There is video footage of them fighting and testing what they've done, whether it's challenge matches, whether it's Vale-Tudo, whether it's UFC with Hoist, etc., and the lineage up to now into the BJJ competitions. There's none of that with Aikido. Yet they were kind of floating around ish the same time, different ages, different things, but there was still the lineage there. But where is the footage, which is just undeniable proof? Where's the footage that Aikido is a valid martial art?
Yeah, and you've opened up kind of a good rabbit hole. And that is, I admire the Gracies for their mindset of saying, we want to have this martial art that we are studying, in that case, jiu-jitsu, be potent and practical and useful. If you have to save yourself or save somebody innocent, a bystander, what have you, it should hold up to that. Now, the original UFC was a master stroke of marketing by the Gracies. That was certainly not a challenge really at all. And I applaud them for being what most martial artists are not, which are good marketers. And this brings up another crisis of Aikido, but you're absolutely correct that it's one thing to say, okay, the training I'm doing is not very good for training for self-defense. Maybe I could make it better that way. And saying there's absolutely no room in Aikido for anybody who wants to try to defend themselves. In my opinion. And I've heard instructors from Aikido, high level ones, come out and say exactly that. Aikido is useless and pointless for self-defense. And it always was. It never was relevant. I'm like, that is just not an accurate statement. I think the best you could say is that Aikido was meant for violence of the era that it was when it was still practical, and now violence has changed, and that it's now become outdated. It's not kept up with the
this
times.
is my argument. It hasn't adapted to the times.
Right. Now,
whereas other martial arts have. So judo has gone competitive, sambo, as you said before, and there's just a thing where it's like, if you're looking at something self-defense wise, if you can strike a little bit, grapple a little bit, and do a little bit of groundwork, you're probably covered quite a lot of the bases of what you need for effective self-defense. Atemi, or striking, for many, many Aikido dojos and instructors, is an afterthought.
In some dojos, it's heresy.
And then others, it's a process to, all right, you strike them to get the lock or to move on. Whereas, O Sensei himself has said, and I think it was Shioda Gozo, who's founded the Yoshinkan system, said that 80% of a fight is striking.
I've heard 75, I've heard 80, I've heard 90, I've heard 99.
Somewhere in that bracket.
But it's a vast majority. Wherever that
over half.
It's a vast majority.
A good 2/3 of it, or what? Definitely.
And in my opinion, regardless of the number, what those statements reflect is a reality of the observance of how violence goes, how physical violence goes. Like that, you just can't deny it. And it doesn't matter what part of the world you are or what part of history you are in. That's where violence really doesn't change that much.
No, it doesn't.
And for those people that want to argue that violence was different back in the 50s, well, are you telling me in the 40s and 50s everybody only struck with shomen or yokomen? Is that the relevance, because that's not what violence is. If you go anywhere into Asia, Africa, Europe, you know, the Americas, even Native American Indians, like where exactly was that? Those are the prominent attacks.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, rather than kind of rehashing, you know, Sensei quotes, which seems to be like a halftime sport with a lot of Aikido practitioners.
Yeah.
That's very of limited use. But to make Aikido relevant and practical, I think at least a portion, not all or even half of the training time, should at least be devoted to innovating your art and applying the techniques that Aikido has to something that looks pretty close to real world scenarios.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about, you know, turning the lights off and having it be go time, you know, with students, but I'm talking about taking a study of what modern violence tends to look like and working up some good drills and some good exercises, seeing how your techniques need to be adjusted in order to accommodate, you know, these real world attacks. Include things that are part of attacks, like tackling, takedowns,
something that's
all
not
kinds of
addressed again. Yeah,
no,
even just straight punches or
Yeah.
like multiple punches, like a jab and a cross, or
Right.
repeated punches. There's always this thing in Aikido demonstrations where it's like, oh, they're going to leave their hand out there,
Right.
and it's like, oh, I'm just going to do that, or I'm going to grab, but I'm not going to do anything about it. So I'm going to grab your chest and I'm going to stay there, and then allow me to. You give me the energy to push, to pull, etc. Fine, and then I either turn or I absorb and move in, etc. But it's like, yeah, but you're forgetting the other hand. If someone's doing that, you're going to pull them into a punch or pull them into a headbutt. You're going to push, and at that point, your balance is gone, so you're being charged somewhere. So at that point, it's a very different mentality to just going, all right, well, I'm going to Uruminagi them or something. And this is half of the issue with people like maybe like people that have, well, let's go martial arts journey, and Rokus doing his thing who's probably the biggest thing on YouTube at the moment of saying, you know, Aikido not practical. He ran an Aikido school for, you know, a long time. I think he was second, third degree black belt. You know him, don't you?
I was third. Yeah.
Third degree black belt. And then one day had an epiphany and went, oh, I don't know if any of this is going to work for me. And then went to MMA and started learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and things like that. And now basically just slates off Aikido and just goes, no, it's not a thing, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But he's got some valid points too.
Sure.
He hammers them in and does a lot of the same things.
Well, and that's the thing. I guess this kind of circles back to the topic, which is Aikido defensible as being a valid art?
Yeah.
And the easiest thing right now to do is to jump on the bash on Aikido bandwagon.
Yeah.
Because you know, everybody and their cat is the same way, and not even martial artists. They'll kind of follow along. And you know, one of the biggest critics is the BJJ crowd. They tend to jump all over Aikido no matter what. And that's pretty easy, you know, to warm up to that side of that community by, you know, bashing. Now, you know, not to go too terribly far into Rokus's background. I mean, I worked with him for a while, and I think that he was justifiably frustrated with what he was taught. He had every reason to be upset with the expectation that was built in his head that what he was learning was valid and useful for self-defense.
Right.
In his frustration, I think he put everybody in the Aikido world in the same blast radius. He didn't understand that he was studying under a spiritualist.
Right.
He was studying under somebody who had no experience with actual real violence. He was not working with somebody who was in that third category of Aikido, the small one, of people with real experience that were competent and capable and knew how to teach dealing with violence. But you know, I'm pretty critical of his instructor, because he took this young man, and I assume because, you know, Rokus is pretty young, and you don't get to be a third degree black belt in your mid 20s unless you start maybe when you're, I'm thinking 15. So he took basically a teenager and allowed this young man to get a delusional view of violence. And where does a student pick that up? He picks it up from his instructor.
Yeah.
Right. And then when things went south, the instructors told the world that Rokus misunderstood. It was his fault. It was Rokus's fault that he misunderstood that. And I'm like, In my opinion, I'm sorry, the student is the result of the instructor.
Yeah.
If the student was mistaken, it's the instructor's fault to set him straight.
For sure.
And you could even say, well, maybe Rokas slipped through the cracks. Well, Rokas
How'd you
was
get to
given
third
the blessing
dan then
to
if you
open his
slipped
own
in through the
dojo.
cracks? Yeah.
Was that?
You're running your own place, running your own dojo.
Right. Yeah.
Got
He was given the blessing to open his own dojo. You tell me that some Shihan doesn't know where this guy is at.
Third dan, you'd hope.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Again, it's the instructor's responsibility. So, you know, I think that there was a huge problem brewing in there. And in my opinion, that is the indefensible part of the Aikidoists that are either doing elegant, beautiful choreography, or they are spiritualist study.
And again, I'd argue that's fine.
Yeah, well, it's fine to one point.
Fine.
And that point, in my opinion, is calling it a martial art.
There we go.
The minute you call something a martial art, you are allowing your student to have in the back of their head, this could protect me someday. This could be useful. This could be applicable.
Exactly.
And that's where, in my opinion, if people want to study that way, that's fine. But there should be total transparency.
If you are open and you're honest and you say, I am not teaching this for self-defense. This is not for self-defense. This is for movement, the kind of Tai Chi-esque perhaps. This is for health. This is like yoga-y, good for strength conditioning or, you know, your joints. And Aikido is awful for your joints, by the way. So it's like, but if you're teaching it in that way, it's like, fine. But then don't label it as a martial art. And then don't label it as self-defense. And that's where
in the best of all worlds, I think that if I could push the button and say, I'm going to solve this problem, and bang, once I push the button, it solves it. I think that the solution would be if there was a separate title for these different expressions of Aikido. Yeah. The martial art part of Aikido, the spirit side of Aikido, which is almost a religion. Yeah. And then the third part, which is a technical focused practice, which is not really applicable. And people that have listened to my podcast may I'm going to revisit this analogy, and that is, if you look at Kyudo, the art of Japanese archery, Kyudo tends to be focused on the aesthetics. It's focused on the ritual and the etiquette and the precision of movement. Yeah. Where the arrow hits doesn't make any difference. It's total practice of form and beauty and aesthetics. Yep. Nothing wrong with that until you need that arrow to hit the target. Mm-hmm. That's when all of the beauty in the world makes very little difference. It's whether the arrow hits or not. And therefore, Kyujitsu, which would be the art of actually hitting something with a target or hitting the target with your arrow, that's the difference between the Do and the Jitsu. Now, I've thought long and hard about whether or not the Aikido community needs to separate into Aiki Jiu-Jitsu or Aikido. And now you get down the rabbit hole of what do these words mean? Yeah. Where did they come about? You know, and it's a mess. It really is a mess trying to unwind that huge ball of twine. And where my mind is right now is the word Aikido really is a blanket term that was not even invented by Morihei Ueshiba. This was prior to him. Yeah. And it was meant to encompass a body of different martial arts, not just Daita-ryu Aiki Jiu-Jitsu, or I guess if you really wanted to name what we currently call Aikido, the most accurate would be Ueshiba-ryu Aiki Jiu-Jitsu. Yeah. Like that's his, but the Aikikai has tried to kind of claim that blanket Aikido term for their version of Aiki Jiu-Jitsu. And again, now we're getting into the deep into the names, but it's really just a blanket term. Aikido is kind of meant to encompass different arts. And so whether or not to abandon it or fight over it, like who gets to claim the name? In my opinion, I don't think there's really a need to fight over it, or who owns it and who doesn't own it, and who can say, well, this is Aikido and that's not Aikido. Again, that's just bickering. And the ironic thing is how many Aikidoists will say that they are not about conflict. And then they turn around and
bash another style.
Start bashing, like, how dare you say that Aikido is a martial art, or how you know, that this is not, this is Aikido, this is not Aikido. It's like,
this gets into the whole other topic, doesn't it? Of this way of instructors. And I'm being very judgmental and very blanket termed, but hypocrites, basically, that are kind of preaching this, I am this figure to be revered because I am a Shihan and a teacher of teachers, therefore you must bow down to me. And this is where partly some of the bullshit comes from, because they've obviously got this power over their students for some unknown reason, whether it's auto-suggestion, NLP, hypnotism, some weird voodoo magic of some sort. But then suddenly chi balls are being thrown and people have fallen 5 feet back, and yet it's labeled as Aikido. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, this is nothing to do with Aikido. Yep. This is just bullshido at the highest level. And it's being labeled as Aikido, which at one point was a very respected martial art. But somehow it's drifted off that track so much that people don't question it anymore. They just go, oh, Aikido, that's the one with the skirts where people look very pretty doing it and people fly and there's no touch knockouts. And it's like, shit.
It is. And sadly, I think of all the arts out there, Aikido is one of the most guilty of having people drift into that land of delusion where they think turning your wrist will make somebody flip over. Like, and any sensible person will look at that and go, what is that? Yeah. And the answer can't be, well, you're not enlightened enough to understand. You don't. This
is the thing that never computed. And I've seen it before. I've seen it happen, whether it's through demonstrations or whether it's through YouTube videos and things. But these people have a lot of people on their seminars, 60, 80, 100 people. And they're all kind of buying the bullshit. And it's
here's
like,
the thing.
What
cults
is going
are
on?
Like that.
Yeah. Well, there we go. You've used it. Yeah. Cults. And it's the group mentality,
like
the group norm.
And you know, whenever I say like all arts have got some valid things to them, I always think of, and I don't know if you ever heard of this, yellow bamboo. Now, years ago, this was roughly the summer that I started with Aikido training. A friend of mine came across this, and it is a martial art. It's called yellow bamboo, and it's out of like the Pacific Rim somewhere, I think Malaysia or somewhere like that. And you can send and get a videotape, and they send you a yellow sash and a T-shirt and the whole deal. And they're promising things like, you study this energy-based martial art and you can learn to levitate, you can learn to walk through walls, you can learn to be impervious to any attack. And they...
Oh, for the low-cost price of $999.
Oh, yeah, you send away for a course. And we found, and this was on early YouTube, I think some of these have been scrubbed, but some of them are still out there. Okay. Where they have these people, and they'll go to some beach, because they'll say that the energy, the key on a beach is very powerful because of the ocean, or they have like a base of a mountain, or out in nature somewhere.
Right.
And they'll have one of these practitioners stand on this beach, and somebody will run up to them to strike them, and they'll basically shout and go "Gah!" like this, and the person falls over.
I've seen, yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you've seen this. And then they've done these challenges where they'll have some guy, who's a martial artist or whatever, say, all right, I'm going to put this to the test. And the practitioner does it and just gets drilled, like run over like a truck. But they have hundreds, if not thousands of these followers, and they absolutely believe this stuff. And it is NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, which is a low level of hypnotism. And this is the sad thing. And it penetrates martial arts. Whether it's your George Dillmans who are talking about these no-touch knockouts, and
but only if you put your tongue on the top of your mouth.
Yeah, exactly.
Your toe off the floor.
But what I've found is that hypnotism really catches with somebody who wants to believe what they're being taught is true. And who doesn't want the promise of ultimate power? Who wouldn't want to be able to levitate, or to be invisible, or to float through walls, or to,
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's an easy sell. It's like free energy, or what they call 0-point energy, is like, or getting more energy out of something that you put into it, like denying physics. Who wouldn't? You're like Magneto now. You're like a superhero. Who would not?
Neo, you are the one.
Superhero power, and to me, that is the distinction line. And this is something that I noticed very distinctly as I got into the Aikido community, is that a lot of them talk in a language that I didn't relate to.
Yeah.
I come from a competition background.
Yeah.
And competitors, and it doesn't matter whether they're wrestlers, boxers, whatever, when you compete live against an actual opponent, you will have a language that you understand. Things like feints, misdirections, energy, pressure, all of these things are part of that realm. What I found in a lot of the Aikido world, they didn't even understand that language, have no clue. You might as well be talking, Swahili to them. There's no register. Like, how do you have a martial art and you don't even understand the language of physical conflict? And now the language changes a little bit when you talk to people like bouncers and security people, military. They have similar language, but it's a little different. It's tuned to their realm, but they still have it.
Removal things.
Yeah. And so, to bring back to the very first part of this, the initial question, is Aikido defensible? In my opinion, the spiritual flavor of Aikido, not defensible. The choreographed part, closer, but still not defensible as a self-defense capable art.
Yeah.
But that last little bit, and this is something that I've been wanting to do. The reason that I put together the Aikido, the Martial Side Facebook group was to try to find and gather those people that either were doing Aikido that was physically potent and capable.
Yeah.
Because those people were very quiet. They don't say much. They're not out there making YouTube videos, and they tend to like, no, this is pretty serious. I don't want to get out and be.
Is that
like,
part of the problem?
This is what Aikido is. But I want those people, they need to feel like they're part of what Aikido really is, because they are a part. In fact, I would say they are probably a majority part, not by the number of practitioners there are, but in terms of the spirit of what Morihei Ueshiba was trying to do. You don't do the level of physical training that guy did just because you wanted to be spiritual.
No.
Like, you just don't. And you don't get, that's the other thing. Being a martial arts phenomenon of a level of skill that he did, like Bruce Lee or Benny the Jet, you don't get to be that skilled by accident.
No.
It just does. You do it only by will.
Yeah.
And people say, well, his will was to just be peaceful and to be, serene. And like, you don't train that way to just be, to walk away from everything or just smile and it takes a certain will. And that's probably another big differentiation between the people that I've met that were elite level competitors.
Yeah.
And I'll say that I was not quite at that total top level, but I was within reaching distance of it. I was in the probably top 2-3% of the athletes that I competed against. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you, you don't get to that level without an extraordinary will and focus to be there. Yeah. I ran across nobody in almost 30 years of competition that got to be really, really good that wasn't extraordinarily dedicated and dedicated to the physical aspect of their martial art. And it doesn't matter what you're in, boxing, wrestling, you name it. You don't just trip into it and happen to be awesome good.
No. And this gets to, I think, the crux of the issue with Aikido. Mm-hmm. The physical aspect is gone.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. I think
largely it is. And that's why I say, and for the promise, and I wanted to kind of get some good notes in here.
Yeah, of course.
And that is there are practitioners throughout the world that are dedicated to making sure that Aikido lives on as a potent martial art. The problem that we have is there's not many of them. Now, I've started gathering.
And where are they? Why are they not so vocal as well?
That's the thing. Having met a couple of them, I'll say that they tend to be quiet and reserved, and they kind of do their own thing off in their dojos or their backyards. Some of them don't even teach anywhere except their garage or their basement. But I think that there is room in the Aikido community to have people like this start to get together. And the other part of this is people who want to have their Aikido be that. It's okay that there is merely interest there.
Yeah.
When we get together and start working on Aikido and developing it like this, we will get it on track and help each other build up. It's not like we need to start from absolute scratch.
Yeah.
So like with anything, you know, the future of Aikido is going to be on the shoulders of those who are active with it. I certainly don't mind that there are the spiritualists out there. I don't mind that there are the choreograph folks out there. The only thing I mind is that their students are not, I don't say distracted, are misled. That if you are a practitioner and you're in the wrong stable, you know, if your dojo is focused on the spiritual side and you want the physical, go hunt and find where you fit in and what your interest is. I'll also say that if you're a senior practitioner or an instructor or a dojo cho, be careful about assuming that everybody wants the same Aikido that you do, or that, you know, what you inherited does. And I think martial artists get into this track very easily, and it's a trap. And that is, they just keep teaching what they were taught.
Yes.
And they just repeat it and do it over and over. And over the years, you forget things. A few things slip away.
It's always the way. It dilutes.
Yeah, it dilutes, exactly. And so it is up to every practitioner, whether they're even a brown belt, or, you know, a black belt, or they instruct class, they teach classes or whatever. You need to keep your training going. You have to innovate and go past what you were taught. You
need to go past
that was just the beginning
of what you need to learn for that next grade or that next thing. Like, oh, this is the syllabus, I'll learn it. Okay, cool. Learn the syllabus. For Yoshinkan, after the first dan, the syllabus is exactly the same. For second, third, you just got to do it better. So it's like, all right, cool. Maybe then's the time to start going, it's time to go off the beaten path a little bit. And
exactly. And this is a part, and I think the trap is this: good martial arts training should always make you a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
If you are in a comfort zone, you're not getting anything out of it.
Yeah.
And that goes true for an instructor. If you are merely regurgitating everything that you were taught and just spitting it out, that's you're winding down. You're really not getting your students. You're not getting the most out of your students, and you're not developing them, because you're not developing yourself. Yeah. If you can't develop yourself, you're not going to be developing them.
This is the constant learning, constant cross training, constant pressuring.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because, you know, the marketing issue that I see with Aikido, and that bridges into this, is that if you tell somebody who walks into your dojo, or even asks you, like, okay, you train Aikido. Well, I've been thinking about getting into martial art. I'd like to know how to defend myself. The last thing you want to tell them is don't come to Aikido, because you're not going to learn. Well, and then, you know, after a number of years of this going on, you have Aikido practitioners scratching their heads like, why aren't new people coming into my class? Why is their student base dropping off? You know, where are they, or dying? You know, they're getting older. The idea that Aikido needs to be some kind of a museum of martial art that is irrelevant is,
you can look, but you can't touch.
It's a bad choice.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. You know, there's a number of ways you can go about livening up your training, livening up your learning. And one of the things I've noticed about many, many instructors is they come across like they're bored. Like they're in class, they're not engaged. Students pick up on that. The minute you as an instructor disengage from your own training and your own advancement, your students are going to go, why am I here?
And that applies to every single martial art. If you're not a passionate, enthusiastic instructor, it doesn't matter what martial art. You could be teaching the best, most badass martial art in the world that covers every single aspect of training. If you're shit as an instructor and just flat and it's never going to fly.
And I'll tell you this, in my opinion, this is the secret. And I'm not a big believer in secrets. There's just knowledge you don't have yet. And that is that an instructor's passion and their enthusiasm is contagious.
Oh, for sure.
The students feel that instructor loves their art. He's innovating it. He can't wait to learn more. There's more to learn out there, and he wants to bring those students along. You'll have students that are excited about their training. They will want to be at the next class. You don't have to berate them.
100%. Yeah.
And you know, I look at a lot of Aikido, and, you know, I'll go to seminars and things like that. You know, I used to do more in the past than I did before even the COVID thing happened. But
yeah,
I just see a lot of people that seem to be there out of obligation. They really weren't excited to be there. They didn't think they were going to learn anything new, and they were right, you know. And the Shihans and people that were there to glad hand and then administer tests and take their pay and go home.
Yeah.
Like, there's really no spirit there. There's no passion. You know, they liked being they like to get together. The social thing is good.
Yeah.
But the social thing is good regardless of what you're doing.
Exactly.
You know, you get into a group of wrestlers and they are happy to get together and do their thing.
Yeah.
You know, so as long as you get people together, you have that strong social side. But
for sure,
I will say too that there is a tremendous satisfaction when you nourish somebody's confidence, that you build them into doing something they didn't even think they were capable of doing. Mm-hmm. And I'm not just talking about memorizing choreography. I'm talking about the security and confidence that comes from being able to handle somebody that is trying to physically dominate you. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Aikido that I do, or any Aikido or any martial art, will make you impervious or you know, that you are ultra powerful, that you will succeed at any physical exchange. Exactly. That's just not true.
It's never a guarantee.
When you know that you can't be just taken out with one quick swipe because you know how to handle yourself, that's a huge thing, you know. And I'm working with a mentor of mine, and he's a good friend, and he's taught me a lot about wrestling because he comes from a wrestling background. And he shared with me a story, you know, just a few weeks ago. He said, I got into wrestling. He said, but as a kid in school, I was picked on a lot. I was shoved around. I was, you know, I was bullied.
Yeah.
He said, until I picked up wrestling, I started doing that, and that stopped right now. And, you know, wrestling is a legit art. Now, granted, it's hard to get training for adults in wrestling. You know, like if you're in middle school or high school, maybe.
Yeah.
But once you get out of high school, like, wrestling is really not accessible. The closest really you're going to get is Sambo, and that Sambo is not really accessible either. There's not a lot of Sambo around, at least here in the United States.
We'd argue it's just MMA now, isn't it? It's the same thing. Learn your double leg, learn your single leg.
Yeah. That's probably about as close as you're going to get. But learning to be physical, like, it is such a tremendous open door when it comes to just being able to protect yourself and walking with the confidence, like, yeah, somebody's going to have a hell of a time dominating me. Yeah. And, you know,
this is also the thing, because this goes back to the point where it's the false confidence that's dangerous as well.
Right.
Where you think, okay, well, I've got myself a black belt. I am the be all end all. I've got my first dan, and everyone goes through it. As soon as you get a black belt, you think you're the dog's bollocks. It's a thing, whether it lasts a week, a month, a year. Some people still think they're the dog's bollocks, but for some people, but you do think that you are the be all and end all because you've got this black bit of cloth around your waist now. But often it's a false sense of confidence, and you need that reality check where you go, shit. So it's important to also have that humbleness to go, okay, well, and it's important not to have that false sense of confidence. If you're wrestling or you're doing judo and things like that, usually you've got to fight for your grade. Mm-hmm. So you've got to do your randori. For judo, BJJ, you've got to roll and you've got a live test. And, you know, you can't get a black belt in BJJ, for example, by just drilling. You need to roll it and you need to live spar it, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. My wife had a story that when she was in high school, one of the young men that she was in school with had a black belt in Taekwondo, which is very common over here in the United States. There's, you know, a lot of strip mall, we call it strip mall karate. And I think he was 15 years old, and he got in a fight in a hallway, and he was stabbed with a screwdriver and killed. And this, just like you say, it's one thing. And now I don't know this young man, and she didn't know him well enough to know that whether he was arrogant or not, but it was within that high school, it was known that he was a black belt. And so, you know, whether or not that was, you know, these thugs or bullies or whoever did this or picked a fight with him, my wife said that he was a pretty nice guy. So I don't think he was an arrogant jackass going around bullying people because he thought, you know, he could do it. But the idea that, you know, he wound up getting into a fight and wound up dead because he either allowed himself to get into a fight or didn't know how to stop it effectively. You know, to me as an instructor, that is my nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
That I have a student come back to me beaten up and bloodied, or I have to go visit them in an emergency room, or they die because I did not adequately prepare them for, you know, physical conflict. And that includes, I do like to include things like body language, pre-fight cues, how to the strategy of awareness, not just here's a technique for what to do against a punch. I think that that's a very common way that people view martial arts, is but it's also a very pedestrian way to do it.
It's narrow.
It's like, it's a beginner. It's like a layman's view of violence. There's a lot more to it. I don't think that it's so much that you need to have a PhD level in violence to understand when the hairs on the back of your neck stand up and you know that there's trouble starting to form. But there are some good things that you can learn, simple, that will help you improve your odds a great deal, and not just by becoming a fighter. And that's, I guess, in making my case for why I think Aikido is one of the best, if not the best arts for people to pick up, for civilians to pick up. And that's a distinction, is there are basically two ways of handling violence in my mind. There is the militaristic way, which is, if you and I are in conflict, I am going to hurt you so bad that you don't want to lift a hand against me anymore. That's what's going to reestablish peace. I'm going to cause you so much harm that you just want to quit. Now, that basic principle goes back thousands of years. That's how armies have dealt with,
stamp it out. Done.
Yeah, that's boxing. That's sport. That is what it is. And there are full-on martial arts that are dedicated to exactly that prospect of just causing so much damage and injury that somebody cannot harm you anymore. But I don't think that approach translates very well into civilian life, because if you're on a battlefield, if you are in extreme violence like that, then yes, that would fit. But for the most part, in a civilized society, or at least a fairly civilized, first world, second world country, that is too much. That is two problems. One is a legal problem, and I would say that's even secondary. The real problem is the moral problem, is what you have to turn yourself into to be that kind of a fighter. That's
and a lot of people aren't capable of that. And no matter what amount of training or how amount of training they do.
Exactly. And Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, who is a psychologist for the Air Force, did a tremendous amount of research about how much trouble the military had, and not just in the United States, but in other countries in the world, training people to become ruthless enough to actually fire their gun in combat.
Bang, done.
That's difficult. So what I think instead, and I think Aikido is almost uniquely suited for this purpose, is to look upon violence as being something that you want to put a stop to, not that you want to prevail at. And that's the militaristic part, is I'm going to be better at violence than you, and that's how I'm going to protect myself. Instead, I think a good civilian view would be, I am going to learn everything I need to know about violence so that I can see it coming, I can manipulate it, I can control it, and I can control somebody else, rather than causing damage and harm if I don't need to. And that's kind of the exception, is you may wind up being under such incredible pressure of violence that you may need to harm somebody. But you train primarily so that you can avoid that if possible. Now, the judgment is going to be yours entirely when that time comes, of what is it you need to do. Maybe you need to cause injury in order to protect yourself. But at least with Aikido training, unlike many martial arts, you have a variable level of applied force. You can use very little, you can try to control, or you can go really hard. And for those people who are in professions like bouncing, security, you need to be able to handle a violent person without harming them. Aikido is pretty much, I think, the top of the game.
I'd argue security and people like that, Aikido is a good. I'd also,
Yep. Now, granted, it takes more skill to control a violent person than merely to cause harm to them.
This is the thing, yeah.
Right. So I guess I would ask, if you morally do not want to harm somebody, do you want to take your shortcut and just say, well, I'm going to carry brass knuckles and, you know, I'm going to land a punch and I'm going to break all their teeth in one shot because you want a shortcut. Now, me personally, I don't want to do that. I would rather take the time to learn to have good control so that I can have the best chance of not harming my opponent if I can do it. And I'll try everything in my power to do that if I can. Of course, along the way, and this is what I'd tell anybody looking to get into martial arts training is if all you're looking to do is merely protect yourself in a street fight, you don't need 5, 10, 15 years worth of training to do it. No. But what I will say is once you start, if you get under a good instructor, you will find that training is fun. It is really spiritually nourishing because you find out what you're capable of doing and that you can actually be a gentleman or a lady in society capable.
Which is great self-defense in itself.
Right. And
just being a nice, decent, well-rounded human.
Right. And you're not going to be somebody's punching bag. Yeah. You're not going to be pushed around. If living life is all about establishing a boundary, whether it's a boundary with your neighbor, boundary with a coworker, boundary with, whoever. And then you reinforce that boundary. Say, no, you're not going to take advantage of me, with respect. This is as far as this is going to go. Yeah. And without capability, you cannot enforce any boundaries. Mm. And so, at that point, pacifism is not a choice. You don't have any choice.
Yeah.
And this is, we can go down the rabbit hole of pacifism, but, only somebody who has the choice of whether or not they will enforce their boundary or not, that only they can truly be benevolent. Yeah. Otherwise, you're just lucky. You're lucky that you don't run across somebody that has made a target of you.
Well, part of it as well.
I don't like counting on luck. I'm not a lucky person. I don't go to casinos and gamble or anything like that because luck. I always come up on the short end of the stick when I count on luck.
Yeah.
But I found strategy, on the other hand. That's where you can survive and prevail when you think smart. And I think, was it Rommel said, Field Marshal Rommel, he said, sweat saves blood, blood saves lives, and brains save both. And that's, I really view Aikido as a strategy more than a collection of techniques. And it's that efficiency and play smart rather than hard. There's a time to play hard, but if you're playing hard, it's because you were dumb somewhere along the line. So,
for me, there's still just that issue of pressure testing, which I just need to keep coming back to, because you can have all these levels of, low level violence up to a high amount of level violence. But if you've never tested that violence against a live opponent, it doesn't matter what level of violence you're able to do, because you won't be able to do any of it. You'll just do that fight, freeze, and it'll be the freeze or it'll be the flight. That'll be it. If you've never felt that, or the only time that you've ever felt, and I'm not saying that to teach self-defense, or because that's a whole other ballgame, whether you need to be a street fighter, or because arguably if you're a street fighter, you're shit at self-defense because you're always getting into fights. So that's not the best person to learn self-defense from. But I also think that it's important sometimes to have some knowledge of what happens to your body, for example.
Absolutely.
What happens to the adrenal response, the adrenal dump after, what happens in terms of, as you've said, the pre-fight cues that you sometimes get. So people lock in, maybe they take a step back, so you're like, okay, well, it's a dominant hand there, maybe, etc. And reading these telltale signs and the aggression that people have as well, getting in your face and things like that you can't replicate in a dojo scenario. And you can't replicate it really for self-defense because you're always training with your friends. So it's a difficult thing to do, but you can pressure test the techniques.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and the closest that I've found, because this has always intrigued me, when I was competing, there was nothing like when you actually went into a match or you were trying to win a tournament. Like that level of pressure, like you said, very, very hard to simulate. And mostly not because what was going on in you could show up to a practice and just do some training sparring and you've dropped the fangs. You're all ready to go and rip this person apart. They just showed up for some practice. Like you're not getting them at their best. Yeah. And this is the thing, like any person, any competitor, any given day or any given moment, they can either be at their best or their worst. Now, when you show up to compete in a tournament, they're probably at their best. That's when they are good to, they're geared up, ready to go. Yeah. And the closest that I've found in the Aikido training, and this is something that is in belt testing. Now, a lot of the belt testing that I've witnessed tends to be a recital. It's okay. Yeah. Show me a cross hand grab to a Kotegash, right? The formula is there. The choreography is already well set. Now, most everybody that's ever been in a belt test has probably been a little nervous. They don't want to go up and show that they're, incompetent in front of all their classmates and their instructors and everything like that. So there's a bit of that anxiety there. Mm-hmm. And that sets the stage for it. And there was a time when I went independent after I resigned from the organization that I was in, where I took a hard look, like, do I want to take testing out? Because it's just, and the answer was no, I don't. And the reason is that every student, because they want to perform well, will be anxious. Yeah. And this is where I noticed things like they started to get shallow in their breathing. They started to let their nervousness, they were not the same nage that they were in normal classes. Yeah. And like, this is close to simulating the stress of what your body acts like when you are under stress. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, it's not going to have the same necessarily gravity that a real situation would have. But what I tell them is, I want you to learn what your body feels like and deals with, how it deals with stress. Yeah. Notice your breathing gets really crappy. You can't integrate it well. Your footwork starts to get sloppy. And they'll notice the same thing. And then I have a randori in every one of my tests, even the yellow belt. I introduced a 1 uke randori, mm-hmm. where somebody is just trying to hit you in the head and tackle you. Mm-hmm. And, your job is to stop it. Don't let that happen. Yeah. While you are anxious and nervous. Yeah. And the goal here is to familiarize themselves, at least the student, at least a little bit, with what it's like to be nervous. And that's something I've observed. Not only, every first belt test, somebody's nervous. I was, I felt the least prepared for that one because I just started. I was only 6-8 months into it, right? But the longer you train in it, theoretically, you should get more and more comfortable. Yeah. Because I've trained this enough and I've done this, but no student does. They all come in pretty nervous, which is, exactly what I want. And I custom do every test to push them to the point where they're partially exhausted. They're dealing with fresh ukes. Like let's pound on your Aikido until it breaks down. Let's find out where your Aikido breaks down and how it breaks down, because that's what we're going to use
now you get
in the next training cycle to make sure your Aikido builds up to solve that problem.
Yes.
And within the competition that I used to do, the competitive part, a lot of people will say, well, competing is about ego and whatnot. It's like, it isn't. It's actually a very practical feedback mechanism. Yeah, exactly. You go and you compete, you find out where you're weak, then you go back to your training, you augment your training to deal with the deficiency that came out in your competition. Then you go back to compete, find out, it's like a constant ongoing cycle of improvement. It doesn't have anything to do with being angry or upset or being, some kind of egomaniac. It's about focusing on your own self-improvement, and competing was a feedback mechanism, and it was a good one, and the more that you do it, you can, for example, go through, I've won tournaments where I made mistakes in them. I'm just lucky enough that nobody saw that my mistake and exploited it. Yeah. But I need to improve. And so this is where that masakatsu agatsu, the true victory, is victory over oneself. When you do it long enough, you realize it's not about winning a bout or set of bouts or tournament. It's about performing without mistakes. It's about performing at the highest level.
Better than you did before.
Exactly. So it's not about, because I'd run into people that would win and, they'd be all celebratory, and you're like, well, you made a lot of mistakes in there, and you're kind of lucky that you didn't run across that dude, because he knows exactly how to take advantage of those mistakes. And this is something that I wish Aikido had a better mechanism for feedback for how people were doing. Yeah. And that's the goal I'm working towards for my Randori training. And I've been working on this for like 10 years now, of how to train Randori and get people comfortable with the maximum level of chaos. So if they're comfortable with that, they'll be comfortable. They won't panic. They won't get so anxious or nervous that they'll break down and freeze when the time comes when chaos really gets unleashed on them. Not to say that they're going to necessarily prevail, but I want them to have the very best odds that they can have through the training that we do.
Yeah.
And so to me, Randori is where that comes all to fruition. And there are different levels of Randori. I don't do full on, 100% intensity exclusively.
Yeah.
There are, ways to ramp up into that, from, the paired kata into Jiawaza, then into, a low level Randori, then a higher and higher, and up until, it's full on go time.
Yeah.
And what I found is I really came into this wanting to study Randori intently, because that's what Aikido claims. It claims like you can deal with multiple opponents. I'm like, all right, show me. Let's see it. I want to check it out. And there were a few examples that were around of kind of the best that Aikido had for Randori. And I'd say Gozo Shiota was up there at the top of the list.
Yeah. But
of course, Steven Seagal. Those are all the people that they were pointing at for, these are examples of what you should check out. And I'm like, okay, well, I can appreciate that. Who do I know that can do that? Who, show me somebody in the same room, not just show me a video or of somebody who's been dead for 30, 40 years, or, is not around anymore. Like, show me that Aikido, the art, not these 2 or 3 or 4 people, can actually do this, and that they can not only do it, but they can also train other people to do it.
Yeah.
And I found pretty close to zero in terms of being able to do that. And I would say that the one that impresses me the most right now is probably Matsuoka. Mm-hmm. For being able to, he seems to have at least a solid Randori program for training. And I think, and now granted, I've not trained under him. I've only seen a couple of videos here and there. Yeah. So I'm just offering my opinion. And I think Joe Tambu also seems to have a pretty good handle on the Randori part.
Yeah, he's strategic with the way that he teaches.
Yeah, and I love the strategy
part.
And
I think angles and tries to line them up and things like that. But he was the first one. It shouldn't
be like a handful of names.
Yeah, he was the first one.
Aikido's promising dealing with multiple people. This should be like everybody should be in on it. Yeah. And so I kind of rolled up my sleeves and went to work, and I got to the point now where I can start training people in the very first week they walk in my dojo on the fundamentals of Randori. I make it fun. It's not terrifying. It builds up very quickly. Like I said, now, and I had to shift this because the yellow belt test that I inherited from the organization I was in did not have any Randori on the yellow belt test.
Right.
But I thought, why wait? Why wait a year before you put this to people? Get them started. And the more you wait, the more you build fear in your students.
Sure.
So yeah, I think that all of this comes back to that relevance part. That we're talking about it, is Aikido defensible? Yeah. And if you're going to claim it deals with multiple opponents, you better follow up on that claim.
It's a bold claim. Yeah.
Yeah. And, frankly, I've seen 3rd, 4th degree black belt tests that was a car wreck when it came to the Randori part. Some guy standing in the middle of the floor, and he'd turn and face one uke, do a technique on him. He'd turn around and face another one who was waiting back there. And
we're all waiting. Like, it's movie style. Yeah.
What is this? This is like bad karate movie. Where the hero only gets one guy at a time. And
that's it. Yeah. We're all waiting in line, ready to attack you.
Right. And with any claim that any martial art makes, if it can't back it up, it's going to wind up having egg on its face. Yes. And that's something to address. Yeah.
Where do you see the future going then for Aikido?
The future is going to rely on the active, and it's going to rely on the young. And I'm not saying that it's about the kids classes, because in my opinion, martial art kids classes are pretty much just to keep the bills paid.
Yeah,
most of those kids,
to get them into the adult classes. That's the way I see it. To get them to start with.
From what I've seen, very, very few of those kids bridge into become adult practitioners.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not their fault. It's not the fault of the parents. It's just that's how young people
are. It's a revolving door.
They grow up and they go on to something else, you know. Yeah. And getting a teenager to stay in Aikido through high school and once he graduates is very, very difficult. I was taking Shotokan karate in my teens, and I had to stop once I graduated because I had to go get a job and I couldn't afford it. So, you know, that wasn't the fact that I was not dedicated. It was just, that's life logistics.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about people that are passionate about the art. And I don't think the age really matters. I think it's the passion level. And that is, you know, we can find, you know, mid 20-year-olds that are passionate about it. We can find 30, 40, even 50-year-olds. I'm 53. And I'm very passionate about the art, and I'm also still passionate about training it so that I can handle real violence. So I'm not resigned to just kind of kicking back and watching other people train. And I'm passionate about my students being very, very competent. And I think that that's where the future is going to lie, is instructors who want to make their students powerful. And I'm not talking just how much muscle they use. I'm talking about competent. You know, I want to have, I think my smallest student physically, I think she weighs probably 95 pounds. I want to make sure that anybody puts their hands on her, they're going to regret it. Right. Nobody's going to drag her into a car, throw her into a trunk, you know, or push her around. You know, that's my goal. And, you know, for her own good. I don't want anybody to victimize another human being. And I would rather spend some time and build up within those people the ability to put a stop to them being victimized.
Yeah, for sure.
And not necessarily by physically dominating somebody else. That may be part of it, but at least making it so difficult that the other person just doesn't want to have any part of it. Because bullies really don't. They want easy pickings.
Yeah.
So
make the risk high, the reward low, and then
Right, exactly. And for people to say, "Wow, I'm too small," one of the favorite story that I'd love to put on it, it's, you know, you pick up a house cat. It weighs what, 8 pounds?
Yeah.
Not really much. Nobody would think that house cat is very intimidating. You try to give that cat a bath, you find out how much problem 8 pounds can be.
Blow your eyes out.
Yeah. And you know, you can't even hold on to it. It's just, you know, and not to say that a frenzy is what you're training students to be, but to realize it's not the fact that they're
frenzy is valid sometimes.
Yeah. And it's going to be playing smart and having the physical fluency to have your best chance of surviving. That's kind of what it comes down to. But as for the future of Aikido, I really only hope that as the different realms of Aikido go on, I'd like to see the martial portion of it grow and flourish. I'd like to see that side kind of come out and be present within the perception of the martial arts world and of people in general.
Yeah.
I frankly don't have very high hopes for where the spiritual realm and the choreograph people are going. I think those two are going to be dying in the next probably 10, 15 years.
I was going to say 10.
But each one of them has their critical mass already. So I think they'll always find, and I hate to say this, but I find that damaged souls somehow get drawn into the cult type.
Yeah. Because they're looking for answers.
And if anything, our world has got so many damaged souls.
Yeah.
The part that breaks my heart is that those damaged souls would be served far better by getting into the martial aspect and building true confidence than by following cult leaders around that are going to basically shower them with BS and get them into this hypnotized, you know, weird spirituality stuff that is really not going to be nourishing to them at all.
For sure.
But we'll see where the future goes. It relies on those who are passionate and active.
Definitely. And speaking about that, then finally, just plug your little thing that you're doing in the UK, hopefully in the near future.
Absolutely. I'm working with some instructors over there, and we're going to be doing, I'm coming over to do a seminar we're looking at the fall, probably in September. Originally, we were trying for August, but it looks like with the travel restrictions and whatnot, we want to play it safe and try to roll it into September. So I want to come over there, and the vision that I have for this is it's going to be a workshop, not a seminar. The thing that has upset me about and disappointed me about many seminars is you get some big shot that rolls in there and tells everybody what they should be doing, and they really don't get very much time with them. Instead, I want to have this be a gathering of martial artists that are going to share their art. We've got a number of different guest instructors lined up, some really good ones, including Dan. Yep. What I want to do is get together and I want to compare notes. I've got some material I want to bring that I don't think anybody's seen before. I want to see what you guys have got. I want to compare, enjoy the art, basically savor Aikido. Let's help people improve their art as well as share what they know how to do that they've found that works great. And I want to look at this as an opportunity to get on the mat and just have a great time with Aikido and martial arts in general. I think there's many other arts that have got great influences that we can use and bring in. Yep. So the instructors that I'm assembling are not all from the Aikido realm. They're coming from other realms too. When we cross-pollinate with other arts, we're going to make a tremendous advancement in Aikido. Yeah. I've used the term modernize it, and I think that kind of puts people on edge a little bit, but I consider it making Aikido more well-rounded. Yeah. Let's take some of the holes that it has and some of the things it doesn't address very much.
Yeah, definitely.
And let's build it up. Let's make it so that it is well-rounded and that we are competent. And we also do the thing that Aikido claims to do above anything else is connect with other people, connect with other martial artists. Yeah. Let's show what we know how to do, and let's learn what other people know how to do. Because I tell you, everybody's got great stuff. In terms of martial arts, I am nothing if not a thief. I will steal from everybody.
Yeah, it's the best way. Nick it all.
Yeah. And it's a blast, and I want everybody to have a great time. And I also want to get the format that I've chosen to do, I've used before many times, and that is small groups training with instructors on a intimate basis, as opposed to having 100 people with one instructor. We're going to gather up small groups, so you start to get to know the instructor on a first name basis. They can help troubleshoot your technique, work on your art, not just the art. Yeah. So, and that's important to me. And this format is really good. Everybody loves it. The instructors really dig it. It's more like training in your home dojo where you got a small group of people and you can really build some bonds. So that's what we got cooking. We're looking at it for September. We may have to adjust the date as time goes on because the wild card is COVID. But I'm determined to get over there, and because I'm so looking forward to this. I know everybody wants to get on the mat now because of.
We're dying for it. Yeah. It'd be cool. Awesome. Thank you for your time, Tristan. And that was another episode of the Martial View, this time in defense of Aikido. So as always, just let us know your thoughts. If you're an Aikido practitioner, what did you think? If you're another martial artist, like one that we've already mentioned, someone that's done judo, sambo, BJJ, etc., always get in touch, let us know what you think. Make it interactive, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.